I guess you kind of spoke about breaking the cycle there and breaking through, and ultimately, no matter what people said about your campaign, in the end, you did break through because you had a great election campaign and you got there in the end. And ultimately, you now are an MEP in the European Parliament. Now,
Scary to say, isn't it?
yeah, there you go. I guess we hear about MEPs all the time,
Yeah.
but I do think that people don't actually understand what MEPs do. And I'll be honest, at times I struggle to understand what the role of MEP actually is. So I guess, would you be able to give the listener an insight into what an MEP does and what your kind of day-to-day job looks like?
Yeah, and like really, I joke often about after a hard day or a difficult vote, and you're kind of scratch your head going, I don't remember reading this in the job description of being an MEP. Like, this is nonsense. But ultimately, we are policy and legislators. Our job is to challenge and push and drive on a European context different changes across environmental. Employment, across farming, you name it, it all happens there. Where it gets really difficult is people often say, but who are actually the leaders in the European institutions? So we've three bodies. We're the Parliament, over 700 members representing all member states, and then you have the Commission, which is, it was described to me as the management company, those that are putting forward things you need to encourage because they need to drive it, and they're the bridge builders between you and the Commission, which is ultimately where our member states represent, so our heads of government and certain ministers collide. So, but for us is like, we can pass legislation. So around, greatest example I can give is like the LGBTQI resolution. So we would have worked, my team and I, really closely with MEPs from right across the political spectrum that believes in equality. We would have put amendments in. We would have made sure we were thinking about different groups, from disabilities to migrants to trans rights in particular, to like the mental health of LGBTQI, to like access to free movements. And then ultimately that it was a resolution. It wasn't necessarily attached to policy or funding change, but it was a strong message coming from the Parliament, and then we passed it off. The Commission supported us because they're also they have built an LGBTQI strategy, and then it's passed off to the council members. But if they don't act it in the member state, that's kind of where we fall short. It's like, we pass things and then it could take 3 to 5 years for it to come down into member states if they decide to buy into it or not, which is probably one of the most difficult things as a young new politician, where you're like, we voted on that 2 months ago. That should, that was done on a Friday. That should have been in the country on the Monday. Like, I gave you the weekend off. Like, I don't understand why we're still not seeing the balance there. But ultimately that's kind of what it is. And then when we moved into policy and legislation, you're basically setting the tone, attaching words to bigger issues and stronger issues, so that the EU as a whole moves in the most competitive, free-moving, opportunistic, fundamental rights way. So, which I'm going to let you in some truth here. I didn't realize how like text-driven it would be. So for me, in these 2 years since being elected, I rely heavily on my staff and my team to guide me a little bit, because I'm like, but why can't we put that in? Well, it's like, no, you don't. You have to take it from treaties, and from treaties which were previously passed, but a lot of them were passed by old dudes with great suits and plus 55. So it's like, but how do I bridge that gap then? So it's a huge learning curve. Every day is a win-learn moment,